Good to see you in a new video on Betrayal Wife Tales. Today I'm going to tell you an interesting story of our subscriber.
I never saw it coming. My name is Adam, and for the last 12 years, I thought I had a perfect life. I mean, sure, we had our ups and downs like any other married couple, but nothing to signal the storm brewing beneath the surface. My wife, Sarah, and I have been together since college. She was everything I ever wanted. Funny, kind, beautiful, and incredibly sharp. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows each other and life felt secure, comfortable even. At least that's what I thought. It all started subtly, almost invisibly, as these things tend to. Little changes here and there. Sarah and I used to do everything together. Running errands, weekend getaways, Netflix binges after a long day at work. But recently, she'd been distant. I chalked it up to stress from her new project at work, a big marketing campaign that had her working extra hours. She'd come home later and later, always saying the same thing, just wrapping up a few loose ends. I never thought to question it. Then there were the neighbors, Ethan and Nick. They lived just down the street, a pair of brothers in their early 30s. Ethan was always around, mowing his lawn or fixing something on his car, while Nick kept to himself, mostly staying indoors. Sarah had mentioned a few times that she'd run into Ethan at the local grocery store or during her morning jogs. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal. After all, Ethan was friendly, and Sarah was just being neighborly, right? One Saturday, things took a strange turn. Sarah was out running errands, or so she said, and I decided to head out for a walk to clear my mind. The air was crisp, the kind of early autumn chill that makes you want to cozy up inside, but I needed the fresh air. As I strolled past Ethan's house, I couldn't help but notice Sarah's car parked in his driveway. I stood there for a moment, frozen, my heart beating faster as my mind raced to make sense of it. Maybe she was dropping something off, or maybe they just bumped into each other. But why wouldn't she mention it to me? I walked past, trying to shake off the gnawing feeling in my gut. That night, I casually asked Sarah about her day. She smiled, gave me her usual rundown, picked up groceries, met a friend for coffee, no mention of Ethan. It felt like a small lie, but I brushed it off. Maybe she just forgot. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us grew. She was always on her phone, laughing at messages I wasn't part of, or disappearing for hours without a clear explanation. One evening, I overheard her on the phone, talking in hushed tones to someone. When I asked who it was, she brushed me off with a quick, "Oh, just work stuff." I tried not to overthink it, but doubt had planted its seed. Then one night, everything came crashing down. A few nights after the phone call incident, Sarah told me she'd be working late again. She had been doing that a lot lately. Always work. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the uneasy feeling in my gut was getting harder to ignore. Something wasn't right. I could feel it. But instead of confronting her, I decided to take matters into my own hands. That night, while she was supposedly at the office, I checked her phone. I know. Snooping isn't something I'm proud of, but my mind was in overdrive. I needed answers. As I scrolled through her messages, I didn't find anything incriminating at first, just the usual chats with her coworkers and a few group texts with her friends. But then, I noticed something odd. 2 contacts saved under women's names that I'd never heard her mention. Eve and Nicole. Now I knew most of Sarah's friends, and these names didn't ring a bell. My stomach tightened as I clicked on Eve's message thread. The last conversation was from earlier that day, and it was surprisingly innocent. "Meet you at the usual spot, and can't wait to see you." But there was something off. Eve's number wasn't familiar, and neither was the overly casual tone in Sarah's replies. I switched over to Nicole's messages, and my worst fears were confirmed. Hidden behind that fake name was Nick, our neighbor. The chat was full of inside jokes, flirty comments, and plans to meet up. My heart sank. They had been texting almost daily, talking about meeting up when I was out, grabbing lunch together when she was working late. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But the most disturbing part? She wasn't just meeting up with Nick. I scrolled further back in the chat and saw messages about Ethan, too. His name was right there, woven into the conversation. There were no explicit confessions, but the way Sarah and Nick talked about him, about how they would all hang out and catch up whenever I was busy, made it clear that Ethan was involved somehow. My blood ran cold. I put the phone down, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to do or how to even begin processing what I had just found. My wife, the woman I'd shared my life with for over a decade, was hiding an affair, and not just with one man, but two. Two of our neighbors. Two people we saw nearly every day. I couldn't breathe. Everything around me felt suffocating. The walls of our home, the place that had once felt safe, warm, were closing in on me. I felt trapped in my own life, unable to understand how it had all spiraled so far out of control without me even noticing. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Every late night, every unexplained errand, every work thing. It all made sense now. But what killed me the most was the betrayal. How could she do this? With our neighbors, no less. How long had this been going on? And why the hell didn't I see it? The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to get proof. I needed to know for sure what was happening. No more guessing. If she had already crossed the line, if she had lied to my face for this long, I needed to catch her red-handed. That weekend, Sarah told me she'd be heading out to run errands and meet a friend for lunch. My heart was pounding as I watched her get ready, knowing exactly where she was going. She left the house, and I followed her. I kept a safe distance, my palms sweaty as I tailed her car down the familiar streets of our neighborhood. And then, just like that, she pulled into Ethan's driveway. My stomach lurched as I watched her park and casually walk up to the door, glancing over her shoulder as if to make sure no one had seen her. She knocked, and within seconds, the door swung open. Ethan stepped out, grinning like a kid who had just gotten away with something. I watched in disbelief as she leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that was far too familiar. My heart shattered into a million pieces as I sat there in my car, hidden behind the trees. She wasn't just meeting him for coffee or a quick chat. This was real. This was happening, and it was only the beginning. I sat in my car, frozen. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. Sarah, my wife, kissing Ethan like it was the most natural thing in the world. The betrayal hit me like a tidal wave. My mind was screaming at me to storm in there, confront them, make a scene. But my body wouldn't move. I just sat there, watching, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know how long I stayed parked on the street, trying to process it all. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. All I knew was that everything felt surreal, like I was stuck in some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The Sarah I thought I knew, the woman I'd shared my life with, was a stranger now, sneaking around behind my back with two of the guys we exchanged pleasantries with at the mailbox. Finally, the door to Ethan's house opened. Sarah stepped out, her hair a little messier, her face glowing with that same smile she used to save for me. Ethan followed, watching her as she walked back to her car. They exchanged a few more words, laughing like this was some casual get-together, not a complete betrayal of everything we had built. I couldn't take it anymore. The anger boiled up inside me, mixing with the hurt, until it erupted. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was out of the car, marching toward them. Sarah's smile faded the second she saw me approaching, her eyes widening in shock. "Adam?" she stammered, like she hadn't expected to see me standing there, glaring at her and Ethan. "Yeah, Adam," I spat, my voice shaking with rage. "What the hell is this, Sarah?" Ethan took a step back, suddenly looking uncomfortable, but I wasn't focused on him. I was focused on her, the woman I'd loved for so long, who was now standing in front of me like she didn't even know me. "It's not what you think," Sarah started, her voice shaky, but I cut her off. "Not what I think," I repeated, the words coming out in a harsh laugh. "You're kissing the neighbor, Sarah, and don't even try to tell me this was some innocent mistake, because I've seen the messages. I know about Nick, too." At that, Sarah's face drained of all color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The guilt was written all over her face. Ethan, clearly not wanting to be part of whatever was about to go down, took another step back, holding up his hands in surrender. "Look, man, this isn't—" "Shut up, Ethan," I snapped, not even looking at him. "I'm not here to talk to you. Get inside your house." He hesitated for a second, then scurried back into his house, leaving Sarah and me standing alone in the driveway. The silence between us was thick, the air buzzing with tension. I could barely keep myself from shaking. "How long?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper now. I felt hollow, like my whole world had just crumbled around me, and I didn't know where to go from here. Sarah looked at the ground, avoiding my gaze. "Adam, please." "How long?" I wasn't going to let her dodge this. Finally, she sighed, her voice barely audible. "A few months?" I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "A few months? With Ethan? With Nick? Both of them?" She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't care about her tears. Not now. Not after what she'd done. "I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking. "I loved you, Sarah. I thought we were happy. How could you do this? With them, of all people?" She wiped at her eyes, struggling to find the words. "It wasn't supposed to happen, Adam. I don't know how it got to this point. I felt lost and—" "And what?" I snapped. "You felt lost, so you decided to sleep with both our neighbors? You decided to throw away everything we've built together?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, choking back a sob. It just happened." "That's bullshit," I fired back. "You don't accidentally sleep with two people. This wasn't a mistake, Sarah. This was a choice you made over and over again while I was at home, thinking we were okay." She didn't have an answer for that. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, looking at me like she was the victim in all of this. But I wasn't falling for it. I turned around and started walking back to my car. "I'm done, Sarah. We're done." Her voice called out behind me, desperate now. "Adam, wait! Please, can we just—" But I didn't wait. I didn't look back. I got into my car and drove away, not knowing where I was going, only that I needed to get as far away from her and this mess as I could. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind a chaotic storm of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. How could everything fall apart so quickly? How could the woman I'd shared my life with, my wife, do something like this? It wasn't just one man. It was two. Our neighbors. It felt like I'd been stabbed in the back, and I wasn't sure how to stop the bleeding. Eventually, I found myself at a park on the edge of town. It was one of those quiet places people go to clear their heads, with a small pond, benches, and trees lining the path. I parked the car and got out, trying to calm the whirlwind inside me. The evening was setting in, and the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow over everything. But I couldn't appreciate any of it. My world was collapsing, and I didn't know what to do next. I sat on a bench, staring at the water, feeling utterly alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face, her guilty expression when I caught her. The image of her kissing Ethan replayed in my mind over and over again, torturing me. I tried to think about what to do next, how to move forward, but nothing made sense. I had built my entire life around her, trusted her, and now it was all gone. I pulled out my phone, still reeling, and debated calling someone, my brother, maybe a close friend. But I couldn't bring myself to explain what had just happened. I couldn't bear the thought of telling anyone how my wife had betrayed me, with not one, but two men. I was too embarrassed, too angry, too heartbroken. Instead, I did something I'd never thought I'd have to do. I opened up my messages and began typing to Sarah. Me. I don't even know where to start with this, but I need answers. Why did you do this? Were you ever planning to tell me? I sat there staring at the message, feeling a mixture of dread and desperation as I waited for her response. It came quicker than I expected. Sarah. Adam, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Can we please talk, face to face? This isn't how I want it to end between us. I read her words over and over, my blood boiling. The audacity she had to ask for a talk after everything that had happened. It was like she didn't grasp the gravity of what she'd done. Me. There's nothing left to talk about, Sarah. You slept with two of our neighbors. You've been lying to me for months. What else is there to say? I could almost picture her sitting at home, probably in our living room, reading my messages with those tear-filled eyes, but it wasn't enough to sway me. Not anymore. Her next message came through, long and full of excuses, but the only words that stood out were the ones that confirmed what I already knew. Sarah. It wasn't just about them. I've been feeling lost for a long time. It started with Nick. He was easy to talk to and things got out of hand. And then with Ethan, I don't know, Adam. I didn't feel like myself. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. I felt sick reading it. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated betrayal, something she'd nurtured over time while pretending everything was fine. She was living a double life, and I'd been completely blind to it. Me. That's your excuse? You didn't feel like yourself? You didn't know what you were doing? You knew exactly what you were doing, Sarah. You made those choices. You chose to cheat on me. There's no coming back from this. She didn't reply after that, and I didn't care. I couldn't sit there, wasting more time trying to understand why she'd thrown away everything we had. I needed to leave. I drove back home that night, feeling hollow inside. When I got to the house, Sarah's car was in the driveway, but I didn't care. I wasn't ready to talk to her. I wasn't ready to face her. I parked down the street and sat in my car for a few moments, staring at the home that now felt more like a prison. Everything inside those walls, the memories, the life we'd built, was tainted now. I couldn't even imagine stepping inside and seeing her. Eventually, I went inside. She was sitting on the couch, looking small and broken, her eyes red from crying, but I didn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't. Adam, she started, but I cut her off. I'm staying at a friend's tonight, I said flatly, not even looking at her. We'll figure out what to do next later. Please, she begged, standing up. Just let me explain. I don't want to hear it, I snapped, feeling the anger bubbling back up. You've already explained enough. I'm done. Without another word, I grabbed a bag from the bedroom, threw in some clothes, and left. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not anymore. I stayed with my friend Mike for the next few days, trying to get my head straight. He didn't press for details, just gave me a place to crash and a quiet space to process everything. I hadn't told him about Sarah's affair yet. I wasn't ready to admit it out loud. I was still grappling with the enormity of what had happened, how my entire life had unraveled in the span of a few weeks. Sarah tried calling me every day. I ignored most of the calls, letting them go straight to voicemail. I just didn't have it in me to hear her excuses, or worse, her pleas for forgiveness. The few times I did pick up, the conversations were short and tense. I'm sorry, Adam, she'd repeat. I know I screwed up, but we can work through this. But every time I heard her voice, It only reminded me of the betrayal, the lies. I couldn't reconcile the woman I'd loved for so many years with the one who had been sneaking around with not one, but two of our neighbors. How could she even suggest that we work through this? There was no working through this. There was no coming back from what she had done. On the fourth day, I called her back. My voice was steady, but inside I was shaking. "We need to talk about next steps," I said bluntly. "About the house. About the divorce." There was a long pause on the other end, as if she hadn't expected me to say it so clearly. "Divorce?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Adam, please, don't do this. We can go to counseling. We can fix it. I'm willing to do anything." "No, Sarah," I interrupted, my tone final. "You can't fix this. You've been lying to me for months. You slept with Ethan and Nick, two guys we see every day, for God's sake. There's no going back from that. I don't want to live in a marriage where I have to constantly wonder who you're with or what you're doing." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But it quickly faded when I remembered everything she had done. The image of her kissing Ethan seared into my mind. "I'll start looking for a place," I continued, keeping my voice calm. "You can stay in the house for now, but I'm filing for divorce." Sarah's sobs echoed through the phone, but I didn't feel the sympathy I once would have. The woman I was talking to wasn't the Sarah I'd fallen in love with, not anymore. "Adam," she choked out, "I know I've hurt you, but we've built so much together. We have a life, memories. Doesn't that mean anything?" I sighed, feeling the weight of those words. Yes, we had memories. We'd shared laughter, love, dreams. But those memories were tainted now. They felt like distant echoes of a life that no longer existed. "It does mean something," I said, my voice softening, "but it doesn't change what you did. We can't go back." The conversation ended with her crying, still trying to plead her case, but I'd already made up my mind. I hung up the phone, feeling an odd sense of relief. The decision had been made. It was time to move on, no matter how painful it was. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, packing up my things, and trying to navigate the mess that Sarah had left behind. She continued living in the house while I found a small apartment on the other side of town. The divorce papers were filed, and the process began to unfold, slow and draining, but inevitable. Each step brought me closer to closing that chapter of my life. Word spread around the neighborhood, of course. People noticed when I wasn't around anymore, and it didn't take long for the whispers to start. One day, as I was packing up the last of my belongings from the house, I bumped into Nick. He was walking his dog, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. There was no confrontation, no yelling, just an awkward silence as we passed each other. I could see the guilt written all over his face, but I didn't have the energy to care anymore. Ethan avoided me entirely. I'd see him from a distance, but he always found an excuse to disappear before I got too close. Coward. Sarah continued texting and calling, trying to apologize, trying to explain. But I'd already made my peace with the situation. There was no fixing what had been broken. Months passed, and slowly life began to regain some semblance of normalcy. I threw myself into work, into rebuilding my routine, and little by little I started to feel like myself again. The hurt was still there, of course, but it wasn't as sharp. Time, as they say, heals all wounds. One afternoon, I found myself at the park again, the same place I had gone that night after discovering Sarah's betrayal. This time, though, the air felt lighter, the weight on my chest a little less crushing. I sat on the bench, watching the water ripple gently in the breeze, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. I hadn't been ready to move on when everything first happened. But now I could see the possibility of a future beyond the wreckage of my marriage. Maybe I'd meet someone new. Maybe I wouldn't. But either way, I knew I'd be okay. I had survived the worst of it, and I was still standing. As the sun set in the distance, casting a warm glow over the park, I let out a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in months. The chapter with Sarah was closed, and for the first time, I was ready to start writing a new one.